Before we get into today's episode, I want to ask you a quick favour. If you're getting value from any of our podcasts, and I genuinely hope you are, could you take just 30 seconds right now and leave us a rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify? It sounds like a small thing, but a rating would make a huge difference, and it'll take less time than pouring a cup of coffee. G'day. Welcome to the Agricoach Podcast, for families on the land who want to grow their family's wealth and prosperity across the generations. I'm your host, Ben Law, and I'm the financial bloke. I want to start today with a moment I've seen play out more times than I can count. A farming family, successful, hardworking, asset-rich. They hit a decision that feels bigger than the ones they've made before. Maybe it's whether to buy the neighbour's block. Maybe it's whether the eldest child is actually ready to step up and take over. Maybe it's a disagreement about the direction of the business that nobody can resolve because everyone involved is too close to it. And in that moment, they look around the table, and everyone at the table is family. There's no one in the room who can tell them what they need to hear without it becoming personal. No one who's seen this situation from the outside. No one with the experience to say, here's what I've seen work, and here's what I've seen blow families apart. That moment, that gap, is exactly what a family advisory board is designed to fill. Now, I'll be upfront. This is something I'll work on directly with families in my accelerator program. I create and facilitate family advisory boards as part of how I help high-performing farming families build the corporate governance and structures they need to thrive across the generations. So this is a topic that I'm genuinely passionate about. But today I want to bring someone who sits on the other side of the table. Someone who served and chaired on many advisory boards and still does, who has watched them work and watched them fail, and who understands the difference between a board that transforms a family business and one that's just a meeting nobody looks forward to. Mike Logan is our guest today, and he's a business coach, mentor, and certified advisory board chairman based in Sydney. What makes Mike particularly relevant for all our audience is that before all of that, he was a cotton and beef farmer. He knows this world from the inside. He was awarded a member of the Order of Australia for his service to primary industry through rural research and sustainable development. And he's written a book, The Asking Leader, built on the belief that the best business leaders aren't the ones with all the answers. They're the ones who ask the right questions. So without further delay, Mike, it's great to have you on the show, mate.
Thanks for having me.
So now, Mike, you've had a pretty unique path from a cotton and beef farmer through to sitting on and chairing advisory boards for businesses right across Australia, and I think even overseas we've talked about. Now, can you give listeners a sense of that journey that you're on and what ultimately drew you into this space of being on and chairing advisory boards?
Well, I was a farmer and still have the farm, but I'm not as active. My hands aren't the colour and shape that they were. But, I did run a farm that was fairly aggressive in that I had a little family farm and I was more ambitious than that. And I had to take over the farm in very, very difficult financial circumstances. And I had to multiply the way I ran the farm so that I could afford to buy the farm back. So I went out share farming and leasing and begging and borrowing. And I didn't steal, but I must have gone close. Land where I needed to be able to multiply my earning capacity. And it meant that I was running teams. I was running a team on that farm and a team on that farm and a team on that farm. And it became that I was running a reasonably corporatized, in an agricultural sense, business where I was really stretching my financial capacity. My balance sheet was wrung right out. And, I would live in fear of my bank manager at the end of March and April every year as I was coming up to harvest and picking because I was right at the limit of all of my borrowing and I really needed to start picking like now. So, I had a very active and interesting agricultural career, which then grew to the point where I was managing farms for investors. So people would come to me and say, I just bought a cotton farm. Can you help me set up and run it for a couple of years so that I can take it over in time? And I did that for 3 or 4 investors that came in, a couple of foreign and a couple of local investors that bought into the cotton industry and needed on-ground expertise, the capacity to build a team and the capacity to run a business. And from that, I decided that I really wanted to brand my cotton. I really wanted to market my cotton differently. I was growing a lot of cotton and I wanted to do something different with it. So I differentiated myself. And I was the first farmer in the world to get a thing called ISO 14001. And you will have heard of ISO 9000, the quality management system. Well, this is the environmental one. So I became a certified environmental farmer as a cotton farmer, which was quite
unheard of,
confronting. Those two things just are mutually exclusive. They do not go together. But I did it, and then I went around the world trying to sell cotton and brand our cotton differently. And I went into partnership with a Queenslander, actually, a guy called John McVeigh. And he and I did a really great job selling cotton to people like Canterbury Clothing Company and Sportscraft. And we were getting it processed up in Indonesia and bringing it down here as dyed yarn. It was really, really interesting business. But I became a little notorious in that I was the cotton farmer that was trying to do something different and position myself differently. Turned out not only in the marketplace, but in the community. The township of Narrabri, for example, looked at me differently because I was the cotton farmer that was trying to do something different. But then the government looked at me differently, and I was the cotton farmer that could think differently about agriculture. So I then got involved in boards. So my farming experience went to boards. The first board I got on was actually Cotton Australia. My role there was around introducing the best management practice program, which was mostly written from the work I had done on my farm, but also the work that was done on the big corporate just down the road, Oscott. And it's a lovely, generous American corporate that had all of these systems and processes that were well documented. And I had these other systems and processes about environment. And they put it together, and a fellow called Alan Williams, who's now CEO of the CRDC, wrote this best management practice program. And I was terribly involved in pushing that into the industry through Cotton Australia. So I was a bit out there. It was a bit confronting to tell cotton farmers that it wasn't about production or the environment. It was about production and the environment. And the idea of that "and" word meant that we were going to improve our productive capacity and we were going to improve our environmental performance. So the government then took me on, and I was on Cotton Australia, but I then got appointed to Land and Water Australia, which is the environmental agricultural program that the government had years ago. I was deputy chair of the CRC for Irrigation Futures. I was an early graduate of the Australian Rural Leadership Foundation. In fact, in course 1, we called ourselves the laboratory rats. I think they're up to course 30-something, I don't even know. But I went on to be the first graduate director of the Australian Rural Leadership Board. And ultimately, I became chairman of the Cotton Research and Development Corporation, which is a ministerial appointment, but a government industry board where we led the research and development in cotton. And that took me around the world in terms of representing Australian cotton in various... There's one international forum that's under the United Nations. It's all very grand. They'd had a conference every year or so in wondrous places around the world that I got to go to, and I was introduced as the honourable member from Australia. I sort of turned around and wondered who they were talking about, but it was me.
That's a terrible experience, isn't it?
Who? But they were really lovely, and it was really interesting to see what the world was doing in cotton and that environmental interface and the introduction of genetically modified and, the whole organic thing, which is a joke. So that got me on the boards, and I got really good experience in boards. And then when I finished farming, I left farming actively about 15 years ago. I got into business leadership coaching. I moved to Sydney to be with my children, and I got into leadership coaching with the Executive Connection, which is now called Vistage. And I ran 2 Executive Connection groups, one in Tamworth. So I had really good regional business experience and agricultural experience, teaching business leaders to lead and operate their rural and regional businesses, and I still have clients in that region. And I also have one in Sydney. The wondrous thing about the Sydney one is it taught me about lots and lots of other businesses, manufacturing and all sorts of public relations, finance and things that, I actually wasn't experienced in. But, IT, what is that? I had to learn about all of these things, and that was quite a challenge. And I really enjoyed it. So the next level was after tech, or now Vistage. I thought the next level was, how can I get closer to these members so that, I can add even more value to them? And the next level was advisory boards. And I'd already been on governance boards, which I didn't really enjoy. So I wanted to be on advisory boards. And I discovered this thing actually in Brisbane called the Advisory Board Centre, run by this wondrous woman called Louise Brokeman. And I was reasonably early in her journey, but it's now an international thing that's come right out of Brisbane. She's running courses in Saudi and UAE and London and all around the world. She's running courses about how to be an advisory board chairman. And I became a fellow of that. I became one of the sort of elder graduates that now helps new graduates. And that was my journey.
Got enough grey hair.
Yeah, that's right. I was called scar tissue. I've made so many mistakes that I've learned from them, actually.
And so now you're chairing a lot of advisory boards that would take up most of your professional time. Is that fair to say, Mike?
Yes, very much. I still do a little bit of coaching, but not much. My main role is chairing advisory boards, and I just love it, to be frank.
Okay, well, for the listeners here, let's start at the beginning of this, because a lot of our listeners will have heard the term but couldn't exactly tell you what a family advisory board or an advisory board is, or how it's actually different from just getting help from your accountant or lawyer. So, Mike, can you just explain what a family advisory board is, or an advisory board is, just in really plain language for everyone?
Well, one way to explain it is to explain what it isn't. And then that makes the space for what it is. But what it isn't is a board of governance. And a board of governance is mostly about policy. It's around risk management. It's around compliance. It's a little bit around appointing the CEO and strategy and reporting. And if you do the Australian Institute of Company Directors course, they're the five main aspects of, I'm a fellow of the Institute of Company Directors. They're the five main aspects of being a board of governance director. But the real focus in the training with the AICD is around compliance and risk management.
And governance.
It's around telling them pretty well what they can't do. And you know what? I believe you can buy that in. I believe most businesses that are not reporting to the ASX, okay, if you're reporting to the ASX, your compliance is a big thing. Like that is, you can get into so much trouble by saying just the slightest of wrong things. For example, when you're trying to raise capital, and you might go and say that we're forecasting an earnings of 10%. And then you might say in the meeting, but we think we'll get 14. Boom. You're wrong. You can't say that. It's in the document you've said 10. You've got to be so careful. So I don't want to be in that restrictive workplace. So what then is an advisory board? Well, the board of governance is sort of nearly tell you what you can't do, but the advisory board is to help you do what you want to do. It's to help your dreams come true. It's to help you achieve your plans for your future. And okay, if there are risks, we can help you identify them, and the board, and we can bring on risk managers, and we can hire people that can give you advice on that. And we can hire accountants and lawyers that can design your company structures. And, a lot of what you do, Ben, is around getting that right for next generations. So the structures and things are in place so that it's effective, it's tax effective. I don't have to do that as an advisory board. My assumption is that it's done, or that they're going to get it done and we don't have to help them with that. So that, for me, describes what an advisory board is to help them make their dreams come true.
It's almost like a part of it's almost like a sounding board. Is that how you'd sort of explain it?
It is. I really like them to bring things to the boardroom every month that aren't reports. You go to board of governance and the CEO gets up and reads a report, the finance person reads a report. And, I've been paid a lot of money to sit and listen to reports, and I don't add any value over those years that I've sat and listened to those reports. So how do you get value out of the room? How do you get them talking at a level that is high value? And people say, I don't get value out of my board. Well, there's a really good reason for that, because you're not bringing a conversation to that board that is structured so that that board can contribute to that conversation. Let's think of an example that I had yesterday. A lovely company I've got, and they want to expand into a new vertical. They've had wondrous success with the first business, and then they've got a second vertical, they've got a third, and they're thinking of a fourth. So they're growing both by organically, but they're widening their growth through verticals. So we had a conversation about, I think this vertical is an opportunity, should we pursue it? So then we had a really good conversation. Well, how, why do you think that? Where does this come from? How does this fit into the existing business? We got to really examine that idea.
And thrash it out.
And the people around the room can say, yeah, I like it, Bart, or I've seen this here, but that didn't work. How are we going to manage that? Or here's another way we could achieve that outcome. Because your CEO or your business owner or the family leader is probably the smartest person in that room, but there's no way they're smarter than the room. And that's a real journey for a lot of business leaders to get over, because they've risen to the top because they're smart, right? And they're usually the smartest. But getting that advice and being open enough to ask for and receive that advice. So at the end of the day, that business leader came in and said, I think this is a good idea. And it turned out it was a good idea. But at the end of the day, we had an even better version of that good idea because that room had thrashed it out. And that's power. Like that's horsepower.
So sharpened the sword, so to speak. Like we've taken that idea, we've cut all the rough edges off, and we've almost like cutting a diamond. You know, you take a raw block, which is the idea of stone, and you cut it and turn it into this beautiful faceted diamond.
And my lovely CEO, it's actually two of them, you'd say, a male and a female, not family member, not husband and wife. There's two partners in a business. And they go to these meetings with this open mind that here's my idea. Let's tell me it's terrible or make it even better. And if it's terrible, well, what else can we do? But if it's okay, how can we make it really good? And if it's already really good, how can we make it absolutely fantastic? And if you've got that mindset as a business leader to be able to sit in that room and think at that level with those wise, experienced people, and if the wise and experienced people can operate in that room so that they're in that position where they're not telling them what to do, it's what I don't want to hear is the advisors say, why don't you do this? You know, you should do it this way.
Why, Mike? Would you like to just unpack that?
Because I really want them to examine this more thoroughly with the CEO. Well, what have we tried so far? What experiences have you had? You don't want to tell them why didn't you do this, and the CEO says, well, we already tried that, it didn't work. Like your advisor's just made a bit of a fool of himself or herself. You know, it's listen it out and really help them build the solution together. So both the CEO's got to have this sort of intellectual maturity and emotional intelligence to be able to ask and listen. But the advisors too have to have that intellectual security and emotional intelligence to be able to offer advice in a way that's really constructive.
Succession isn't a document. It's a decade of deliberate work, and most families start way too late. By the time it feels urgent, the hard conversations are already overdue. Our Roadmap Workshop is where you get ahead of that. The clarity, the conversations, the preparation, years before the pressure hits. I'll be facilitating these 2 days personally on the Sunshine Coast, August 26th and 27th. One event this year, and early bird pricing closes soon. Don't be the family that fails because you always meant to get to it, but never actually did. Grab your tickets now at agricoach.com.au/take action. That's agricoach.com.au/take action. Yeah, that's a really powerful point, isn't it? Because this is the thing most people, I would say, and me coming from historically was a financial advisor back in the day, is people always come to you for advice. What should I do? Whereas I think the true value of coaching or advisory boards, etc., is not to give them the answers, it's to uncover the answers, because most of the time they've got the answers, they've got the horsepower. They just need someone to, like I said before, thrash it out with, have the conversation, air it, turn it over, figure out, is this a great idea or is this a terrible idea, or what have I missed? You know, have I missed an awesome opportunity that I just didn't quite see, or have I missed an awesomely difficult risk that I haven't seen?
Yes, yes. And it goes to ownership. If you're a business leader and you say to your employee, we've got a problem here, go and do this. Whose plan is that? It's yours. And if that plan doesn't work, well, is it the employee's fault or is it yours? No, it's actually yours. But if you're a really bad CEO, you will blame that employee for not delivering your solution well. However, if you went to that employee and said, here's our problem, do you agree that it's our problem? Tell me more about it. Where did it come from? Why is it a problem now? How's it affecting us? If we solved it, how would we know? What are the ways you would solve it? Give me 3 ways. And which way do you think is the most likely to work? I think it's that one. Why do you think that? Okay, well, what are you going to do and how long is it going to take and what am I going to see? So you didn't actually tell that employee to do anything. And it's the same with the board. The advisory board is the CEO comes to us with an idea and we ask those series of questions We actually really don't need to tell them anything, but we do need to help them discover their idea more clearly.
Use our wisdom and experience and intellect to be able to uncover those key important discussion points.
Ownership then goes to accountability. If that person owns that plan, here's what I'm going to do, and here's what the board's going to see. Okay, well, it's now March. What are we going to see in April? Or it's, 3 months. What are we going to see, at the end of that quarter? And we write that down. And I make a note on my little planning document that I'm going to see this at the end of that quarter or the end of that month. And then we go back to that board meeting, and I've advised that CEO before that board meeting, I want to see where you are with that. Now, it could be that they've not met it, or it's failed, or it's succeeded, a whole range of opportunities here. But what the board has been then able to do is hold that leader accountable to their own plan. And that's really powerful. And then you can have a conversation, well, why did we succeed, or why didn't we succeed, or did we overestimate, or did everything goes wrong. What's the Mike Tyson line? The best plan comes to pieces the first time you get punched in the face or something.
Yeah, I love that one. Yeah, I always ask people, I say, what's your punch in the face plan? And they go, what do you mean? I said, your Mike Tyson punch in the face plan. What are you going to do when you get punched in the face? I'm like, I haven't even thought about that, Ben. So, yeah, I love that quote.
And there's a lot in Einstein 55-5 thing you will have heard of. If I had an hour to solve a problem, I'd have the first 55 minutes understanding it and the last 5 minutes solving it. So the idea of having the board with the discipline to have the 55 minutes understanding and helping the CEO understand, the business leader, the family leader, whoever it is, understanding their own problem and their own opportunity or their own challenge, whatever it might be that they're bringing. It's often what's keeping them awake. It's often what can't I resolve? What do I need help with? And okay, let's have some time with that. 55 minutes.
It's interesting, Mike, because I would expect that family businesses, and agriculture is particularly important for this, is when there's a lot of family members involved, they would get particular benefit out of a process like this, because generally most people, when they're trying to make decisions or problem solve or look at opportunities, the only people sitting around the table are family. So it's not like a business where you might have the CEO and you might have the CFO and the operations manager, et cetera, sitting in the room. It's all family. Would you see that as a really important thing, that families are able to get that outside perspective rather than just be an echo chamber in the family or have one person that dominates the discussions?
And that's what happens. There is normally matriarch, patriarch. It's often a matriarch, by the way, that is controlling in the room and is dominating. And by having external advisors like a chair, like me, to sit there as a neutral player in the family, but also some external advisors around areas of interest that might meet this family's needs. So, for example, in an agricultural context, it could be around capital. We're trying to grow our business and we know that land is very expensive and we're borrowing and we're at the limits of our borrowing. And how do we manage all that so that we can keep acquiring and growing, because these are our plans. So let's bring in an advisor, somebody that's done this, that's experience in that particular space. I do it a lot with companies that are acquiring and rolling up and growing, both organically and through acquisition and also through verticals. And they run out of money. They grow, they need more stock and they need more labour, and, there's working capital tied up. So often bringing in a capital advisor is really powerful. And then when we go to the bank, we're knowing what we should be asking, we know what we should be demanding. And there's a whole other level, well, okay, are we going to raise capital? And how are we going to do that? What does that look like? Where do we find the capital? What are the rules around getting that capital? So getting advisors like that around the table is really powerful. It also changes the feel of the room when you've got a couple of external advisors in the room. And sometimes the family behaves better.
Yes. I usually say when there's external parties in the room, the family's behaviour definitely changes. People are usually on their best behaviour.
Yeah, and that's not, not as if they all behave badly. I'm not making that assumption, but, there is sometimes room for slightly different behaviour when there's an audience.
Yeah, well, like we really push on the fact of high-performing families. That's obviously the phrase I've coined over the years, and I talk about families raising standards. And I've talked with Chris Webb, the high-performance coach, and we always talk about raising standards. And this is one of the ways that families can do it, is actually having a professional type structure that can actually raise the standards in the room. Everyone steps in the room or steps within the group that raises the standards naturally, and then we start operating at a higher level naturally, because families can make the mistake of they just act like they would on the farm, because it's a completely different environment you're in when you start, because you're not really talking about, what crop should I plant this year? What paddock am I going to put it in? Oh, that employee's not working. Yeah. Should I buy a case instead of a John Deere? Those things aren't the conversations. These are the bigger picture strategic decisions that are going to be a massive leverage or catalyst for change in the business, not the everyday little problems that we don't really need to be discussing. So when you get a family in a room, it can also be intoxicating, because you are bogged down in the everydays. The fence is broken. I've got to service the tractor. Johnny, the farmhand, didn't shut the gate and the cattle are all mixed up. We've got to go and sort that out. Yeah. I lost an employee on the station up north. I could get you down. Whereas if you can get out of the room, sit in a room and start talking about the big picture, where we're going, what we're doing. I mean, for most people, that's, unless you're hitting major obstacles, that's the fuel for growth.
That's right. And getting that in the right order, in the right level of conversation around the family is something you can structure. And it's one of the mistakes a lot of boards make, is that they focus on the operational rather than the strategic. The operational is day to day. It's what crop do I plant, But the strategic is at a much, much higher level. What machinery do we need to achieve our goals, or what farms do we need to buy, or what are the gaps we have in our people that we need to fill, or these higher level conversations that people can have around a boardroom. But I find as the board chairman, if I let them focus on the operations, they will happily go down that rabbit hole 4 days.
Yes.
Because that's their natural place.
Yeah. And it can be uncomfortable.
Yeah. So I'm going to say, okay, that's good. We don't need to talk about that. We need to talk about this. So I always structure the meeting so that doesn't happen much. So I want them to give reports, but I want the reports to be read. All the team, all the family, all the advisors have to come to the board and have read the reports. Finance, marketing, operations, whatever it might be. 1 pages is good, but, obviously people get a bit verbose. But what I want them to do is also focus on the money, the cash flow. But the first thing I want to do is get them to talk about strategy. So I call it Get on the Sofa, SOFA. And I structure my meetings around, let's talk strategy first. So CEO, business leader, I want you to bring 3 strategic items to each at least quarterly boardroom meeting. I want you to bring 3 big picture issues that we've got to resolve. And they could be part of next year's strategic plan. They could be active, that more immediate, but whatever they are, I want 3. And they should be prepared in a paper. And I very rarely had a CEO, business leader, give me the paper, but I always ask for one. Give me what's the problem, where to come from, or what's the challenge, what's the opportunity. Impacts is the next one. How's it affecting us? If we got this right, what would success look like? And then what are the choices that we could choose to achieve this challenge or opportunity or issue? So that should be a 1-pager. So there's your strategy conversation, 3 times that. So then we get into operations, and it isn't let's read the report. It's what are we observing in the report that we need to comment on? And it might be something coming over the horizon that is implicit in the report but isn't yet clear there. It could be that perspective that somebody can see coming that's in the reports that are operational. Here's something we're doing, but are we planning for this risk? Or are we getting ready for that opportunity? That sort of thing that's coming out of the report. So, okay, we're going to give operational reports, but I want a high level thinking about that report. The 3rd letter in the SOFA is F, and it's finance. But it should be C, it should be cash. Now, I know, you trained as an accountant, and I did too, actually. The black art of accrual accounting is mostly completely useless in this context.
Yeah, it's just for the tax department.
The only person that reports to is the tax office. And how often do you report there? Once a year or thereabouts. Your quarterly for your BAS and so on, monthly for your BAS, depending on your circumstance. But that's it. The rest of the time, your financial software should be in cash mode. You should click the little switch up the top that says you want a reporting accrual. Okay, cash. Because I really want to know how much money was in the bank last month and how much is in it this month and what's the forecast for the next 12 months and what's the forecast for the 2 years after that.
Where are there some shortfalls? Where are there some problems?
And this is where all businesses go wrong. This is where they all fail. Growing businesses run out of cash. So, my first question at the beginning of each CEO, I have a meeting with them before each board meeting. How much money have we got in the bank? And as they say, I don't know. You say, well, you need to. And you look at that wondrously successful family businesses over the years, and often they're Chinese or Jewish or these people that really focus on their cash flow. I always have a joke that and they know each dollar in their bank by its first name. I totally focused on that.
Well, it's part of their religion, especially in the Jewish community, is to become financially secure so you can look after yourself, your family and others. I learned that a number of years ago, and I think that's a beautiful thing. And I think we should be promoting that more and more within agriculture is to have that. You need to keep, and not to point out to everyone that farmers don't worry about finances. I want to be clear, but I think we need to be focusing on it regularly, like having a detailed knowledge of it.
And farming, is cash negative a lot. You're burning money every month. You've got less and less and less, or you're further and further below the red line. But then you have a harvest or a cotton picking, or you're selling the wieners, whatever it is that you're doing. You've got a capital injection. Okay, well, how are we going according to that capital injection? What are our forward sales and what are we looking for? We can project all that into our cash flow. So having those projections. So that's the F. Very, very focused on cash. Don't tell me you're showing a net profit. Don't want to know. I want to know that we're generating positive cash flow. Year on year, month on month if we can. A lot of the businesses I've got are, cash flow businesses, and we can generate a little surplus every month. And at the end of the year, that adds up to a nice one. The A is accountability. At the end of the meeting, right, let's have a quick summary. What did we agree we're going to do at this meeting? And what are we going to see in the next meeting? That's how I structure my meetings, so that there's a logic to it and it's according to a plan and we get some really good input from the group.
Love it. I love it. I was going to say A would be, aha, what have we learned? But no, accountability is much better.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah. It was interesting. I use a system called the 3 A's with what I do, Mike, and it's awareness, alignment, and accountability. So we're aware of what the issues are or the opportunities. We're all aligned that, yep, this is what we're going to do. And then accountability is the third pillar to it. And I think if families, follow that strategy consistently, takes so many issues away from the family.
Yeah, it does.
Now, Mike, the next question I'd like to ask you is, I can see the value of this. A lot of families, would benefit from this. And I think I want to make the point before I ask the next question is, this is scalable. So you might be sitting in a family business going, well, we don't need this big board and reporting and all these sorts of things. You can start off at a very basic level if your operation's not large enough or scaled enough or complex enough. There's multiple ways to skin that cat. So I'd want people just to remember not to throw the baby out with the bathwater and go, oh, we're not big enough for that. I think there's value in doing this for everyone, regardless of your size. But I want you to sort of point out, this might be the dumb question of the podcast, but when do you actually know a family's ready to have some level of advisory board for their business?
There's got to be a trigger point. There's got to be an inflection point that drives them. And I always describe it as now and where. Where are we now? And you can have a long time answering that question. What are we good at? What are we not good at? What are our strengths? What are our weaknesses? But what are the opportunities that are in front of us? The old SWOT thing, you can play with all this. And what are the threats we've got coming? But then you can start to think about, well, okay, here's where we are now, but where would we like to be? And there's got to be a time gap in that. And the wonder of agriculture is that we're used to long time gaps. We're used to long planning, patient capital.
Well, we're intergenerational, aren't we?
Exactly. I've had one that I don't even know how many generations it was, but I think it was 380 years old. The gap between where we are now and where we want to be in agriculture can be intergenerational. It can be long, long, long term. And that's patience. That's a scale that most businesses don't think at. If I go into most businesses and say, I want you to give me a 5-year plan, I will do well to get a 3-year plan, and I'll mostly just get a 1-year plan. But in agriculture, when you go to them and say, well, where do you want the next generation to be? Like we're talking 30, 40 years. They go, right. They're quite comfortable with that. Like that's us. That's the scale at which we think. And the one I had in England, he took me to this building. He said, well, this was built by my great uncle in 1919. And he said, it's been here for 100 years. He said, the changes I'm making now, I want to last for that period. That intergenerational family had that time frame in their head that, 100-year timescales was quite normal. And that's the wonder of the market that we're in, is that we can think in long timescales. So where are we now, and where do we want to be? And what are those inflection points? Well, normally it's intergenerational, but it could also be opportunity. We have the opportunity to go into a irrigation. We're a big grazing farm, and we could turn into a grain farm. There's a lot of grain farms that were quite recently grazing farms in Queensland. I drove from Narrabri to Walgett the other day, and there's not a tree, there's not a cow, there's not a sheep. And in my youth, there was not a tractor. These things have changed over time. So, we can make big changes within generations and intergenerationally. Also, the farms have all got bigger over that period. We had a place called Narrabri, and I would be there a lot. And, we had what was a 40,000, it was a big farm. But that's not a big farm out there anymore. And that farm got consumed into a much, much, much bigger farm. And it's now part of two private families that have built much, much bigger enterprises around those farms. It's change. And where are we now? Where do we want to be? Well, we want to be like those people. Well, we want to go into a new market. We want a differentiated product. I was talking to a man the other day that's in organic chickens, and he had to build his own processing plant. And that's a whole series of steps that his dream is to be there. And he was there, and now he's there. Well, what's next?
It's interesting, Mike. I actually see, and obviously all the value that you've talked about, but I actually see one of the key values that nobody ever talks about, and that's next generation preparation. So the next gen coming through, preparing them to lead and take over the business and manage the family wealth is a huge opportunity here, because mum and dad have created so much IP or knowledge in their head and judgment and wisdom, growing the business and managing the wealth and the complexity. They have the next generation coming through. How do we actually transition that wisdom over time? Most families are really good at teaching them how to be a good cotton farmer, grazier, someone who runs an abattoir, but they're really not, on average, great at teaching them how to manage a business and manage people and use their judgment and strategically plan, because mum and dad, or mum or dad, most of it all goes on in their head. So when you actually bring the next generation in the room and they start to observe the thinking and the critical thinking and the driving the business, it's actually a beautiful training ground for the next generation, and it actually accelerates their development, I suppose you'd say. It accelerates their development and secures that their ability to be able to take in that wisdom and knowledge, and surrounds them with quality people, so that they're not spending the next 10, 15, 20, 30 years making all the mistakes that mum and dad have done. And quite often the next generation, especially when they're younger, they don't want to listen to mum and dad. What would mum and dad know, especially the younger they get? So if they're sitting in a room with someone else that's asking good quality questions and helping them get unstuck, and they start to then learn by osmosis. And I think that's a beautiful part of the whole process. And I would suggest to families, if that was the only reason you do it, it would be a tenfold ROI.
And I really like the idea of trading wisdom and energy. So the older generation's got the wisdom.
Yes.
And the younger generation's got no wisdom, but got lots of energy.
Yeah, they've got to get up and go.
Ideas, and they're creative. They want to make stuff happen. So the older generation tends to be secure and risk averse. The younger generation wants to evolve and change to meet what they see as this new world. And it is a new world every day. It's got heavens, what's happening at the moment, around the world. It's scary, right? So The wise person saying, batten down the hatches, and the energetic person saying, in adversity, there is opportunity.
Yeah.
In the old Chinese saying around, opportunity comes from this sort of conflict. So how do we balance those two? And you said the word osmosis, and I really want to disagree with you on that.
Yes.
In a nice way.
Yeah. No. I love being challenged. That's how I learn.
If the idea is to transition the leadership from the wisdom to the energy so that they both benefit, the wise is now safe and they're set up so that their lives are secure and they've got the grandkids coming around and all of those sorts of dreams are coming true. There's wondrous Sunday lunches on the veranda. That's the sort of dream, isn't it? But the younger person really wants to take the risk and take on the energy, apply that energy to growth and to change. Then it's best that we don't do that by osmosis. It's best that we plan it.
Mm-hmm.
And we turn it into bite-sized steps that are achievable. And if the older generation wants to pass it on to the new generation, let's sit down and plan it. To get to there, what is the first step we should take? Or what is the last step? And we'll work our way back so that in this quarter, you're going to learn about the finances. Or you're going to learn about how to run a team meeting. Or you're going to learn about some aspect of leadership that we can build capacity in each organised step. It might be that the wise, the elderly, do that teaching, or it might be we bring somebody in. It might be that we send our young, energetic people out to learn, and join a peer advisory board or, the things that you're doing so that they learn together. And everybody's different. How do you all learn? Some people learn audibly, being told. Some people learn by reading it visually. Some people learn in groups. And some people learn actively, hands-on. So how does everybody learn? It's a really interesting way to understand how we make that pathway successful. And in those small bite-sized chunks, we need to make sure that the first one's successful so that at the end of that first quarter or that first plan, that person feels like, I've really got that. And now I'm ready for the next step. Because if they're not feeling like I've got that, we cannot go to the next step because they won't have confidence in that next step. We've got to stay on the first step a bit longer. And that's okay. That's fine. But when we're ready, we can take the second step. And we might have to extend our whole plan. But that's the way we're going to get success. Why take the second step? We haven't completed the first step. We're already in failure. So let's pick this up really early and work it. Well, you didn't learn well that way in that first step. What are the other ways we could learn this? Let's try and think that through. And you see how you can build it's not by osmosis. It's not by watching dad or mum. It's not by sitting in the meeting. It's by actually structuring it.
Love it, Mike. Well, Mike, we're really running up on time now. I could talk about this a lot longer. Look, this has been a great conversation. I think all our listeners will have got a lot out of this. And I just want to really stress that point about whether you're a small business, whether you're a very large business, this is the kind of structure you need if you want to accelerate or solidify your business, especially across the generations. So, Mike, if someone's sitting here listening and going, well, we don't have this massive business, or maybe you do have a massive business, and you're going, I need to start thinking about this. I need to start taking some action. What's the first thing a family should do if they're thinking about going down the path of setting up a family advisory board?
It's what you do. It's about thinking about the future. What are we now and where do we want to be? If you don't have an answer to that question, you're not ever going to get to that future. There is some small chance you'll trip over it. But if it's not deliberate, you won't get there. So where are you now and where do you want to be? And what time frame, what scale is comfortable for you? And obviously I've got lots of businesses, they're not all farming businesses. They're thinking in terms of 3 and 5 year time frames. They might want to grow a business and sell. I call it shoot the lights out. Okay, well, let's build a plan so that we can get to that 5 year time frame where I've got one at the moment. I think he started off at 4 million. His goal is to get to 100 million and he wants to sell. We know we can't get to 100 million without bringing in new capital. We've got a capital advisor. We're doing all of this stuff. We've got it all planned out. I think he's about to get to 15 million. in the first 2 years, it's been fun. It's been challenging. It's been really interesting. But he has a plan. He knows where he wants to go. And what we do is help him build the plan to get to that point. So think about your future. And if you don't have a plan for the future, sit down with your family, sit down with your shareholders, sit down with the other people in your business. So where do we want to go? Bring in an advisor, get them to help you answer that question.
Yep. The secret to success, I heard someone say once, I think it was Dan Sullivan out of America, and he said the secret to success is who, not how. We want to get from A, we want to get to B. You don't necessarily need to find out how to do it. You just need to find the right who to help you. And I think you've just alluded to that, Mike, because, farmers, I think, quite often make the challenging mistake of they're rugged individualists and do everything themselves, a jack of all trades. And I think that's a real inflection point in business, is to be able to identify when bringing external people in. And I had a family meeting with one of our families yesterday, and they said, we've got so many people on our books that are helping us out do things like HR, bookkeeping, administration. They're bringing construction managers in for their expanding on their feedlot operations and stuff. And they said, we used to think this was really bad, we could do it all. And they say, now we've got these people on our payroll and they just do it. Yeah. And they said, we've just identified the who, not how, and their business has exploded over the last 5 years, and it will continue to do that as the next generation comes in. So I just want to leave with everyone, if you're stuck, if you don't know, the question you should be asking yourself is, who can I get to help me, not how do I do it?
Exactly. Because if you don't know how, who, somebody can show you how.
Yeah, exactly. There's always someone out there.
And finding that right person to suit you is important.
Now, Mike, if people want to find you online, where can they find more about Mike online?
Oh, I do have a funny old website, askingleader.com, all one word, Asking Leader. And I'm on LinkedIn, Mike Logan AM on LinkedIn, or Asking Leader on LinkedIn. I'm not very active. But, you can contact me there. Most of my work comes from referral. I don't really advertise. People seem to come, I've heard of you, or somebody said you were good, and then I seem to get introduced that way. I don't really advertise.
No, I get that, Mike. Most good people don't. Yeah, word of mouth is the best marketing in this world. So, no, that's been really valuable. Before we head off, Mike, if you had to leave one thing for families, one little nugget of gold, what would that actually be before we wind up?
Well, it's ask questions. You don't have all the answers, but the family, the group, can help you answer the questions that you've got. So ask questions and be really curious and be disciplined about asking. And I call myself the asking leader because that's the key to leadership. There's two keys to leadership. One of them is curiosity and the other one's self-discipline. If you can ask questions and you can control yourself to be asking those questions, and you can be disciplined enough to deliver on the plans that you've developed from answering those questions, you'll really succeed. So ask questions. Ask questions of yourself, ask questions of your team, ask questions of your family members, ask questions of your shareholders. You'll find you become the smartest person in the room without ever having to give a view.
Love it, Mike. Love it, Mike. Awesome. Well, look, thank you very much for coming on today. Coming on a podcast is always an interesting thing for people. So I'm glad you've done that. Thank you very much. And look, I reckon we'll get you back on again. If any listeners want to hear from Mike again, send me a message.
Happy to help and lovely to deal with you, Ben. You've got a really good thing going here. I think your whole program and what you're doing for one of my clients, in fact, is very impressive.
Well, that was a great episode. I really enjoyed that one, digging in with Mike. He's a wealth of information. I think there were some real gold nuggets for everyone to take away. Just a couple of points I want to really hammer home before you run off, so just be a little bit patient with me. The first one is an advisory board or a family advisory board is to help your dreams come true. And often the secret to success is who, not how. We hammered that a couple of times in the podcast, so I want you to take that with you. And also, if you're the smartest person in the room, that's great, but you're never going to be smarter than the whole room put together. That's a really important point you want to embody, because quite often people run into the problem of thinking they're the smartest one in the room, or they can't find anyone else smarter than them, but they forget the collective knowledge and wisdom of a room can far outweigh what you know. And the last thing is, I just want to directly talk to the next generation. So if you're struggling to be involved in the decisions of the business, or you feel like things are stuck or not going in the right direction and you're frustrated, a really good thing for you to possibly do is share this episode with mum and dad or the rest of the family. I think this could really trigger some great conversations in your family and might get you unstuck and might actually be the leadership thing that your family wants to see from you. So take the initiative and share it with them. And finally, if you happen to know someone else that this might actually value, we'd really appreciate you sharing it with them. This is how we share the wealth and wisdom. The more you share it, the more we can actually get access to other families and help them get through the problems that they've got in their family and also help their dreams come true. Now, until next time, I'm Ben Law, I'm the financial bloke, and remember, it's more important who you are than what you've got. I'll see you next time. Today's episode is brought to you by Morrissey & Co. Morrissey & Co. has been trusted by Australian cattle producers for livestock handling solutions since 1910. For generations, the family-owned business has stood for craftsmanship, quality and reliability because life on the land demands the tools that endure. Every piece of equipment is built tough, designed to make your work safer and more efficient. Crafted for today, enduring for tomorrow. Want to know more? Head on over to www.morrisseyco.com.au or call 07 4668 5317.